Hello everyone and welcome back to this brand new video. Now for today we're going to be taking a look at the best decks from the Red Bull Untapped tournament. For those of you who don't know, Red Bull had a tournament this Saturday and these are the decks that caught my interest. But before we actually get into our deck decks, I would like to mention two things. One, I'm not going to be going in depth with every single pick that the deck has because this is more of a general overview of every single deck. If you have any question regarding any of the picks or any of the decks, feel free to leave your questions in the comments down below or just join our Discord server and I would be more than happy to help any of you. Second of all, I would like to please ask all of you to subscribe because it helps the channel a lot. If you want to help the channel beyond that, there's a Patreon link in the description down below. And with that out of the way, let's get into our decks. So this is the first deck that caught my interest, which is Javier's Dominguez list for Temur Reclamation. I like two things about it. Mainly one, it's tailored to beat aggro. And second, it has a lot of interesting choices, whether that is in the main board or in the sideboard. Now, one thing I wanted to mention that his list actually won second. He's not the first player. Obviously, the first position was Temur Reclamation because, you know, that deck is very fair. But I really like his deck while climbing on the ladder. I was testing it yesterday and I went 8-0 with it. So with that out of the way, let's get quickly into the choices. So he's playing 4 Growth Spiral, 3 Uro, 4 of Reclamation, and 4 of Expansion Explosion, which is obviously what you would expect from a Temur Reclamation deck. Now for his 2 drops, he's playing 3 of main board Aether Gust. Some players chose to play 3 of Scorching Dragonfire in the main board just because they were afraid of mono red aggro and mono black aggro, but that's something that you should tailor depending on what you're seeing on the ladder. I haven't been seeing a lot of mono black aggro, so I chose to stick with Aether Gust because it hits both green creatures and light creatures, but you can tailor that you're choosing. He's playing 2 off Negate, 3 off Dispute to obviously stop Uro and Growth Spiral. The very interesting pick is Storm's Wrath. We haven't been seeing that card in the last couple of lists that Temur was playing, and that's something super cool. And the last interesting pick that I have for his deck is Nissa. Nissa with Reclamation is insane. You generate a lot of mana and then you can dump that mana into either your Shark Typhoon or your Expansion Explosion, or you could just cycle some of your cycle lands with it. So like there's no waste from the mana produced with Nissa. Now for the mana base, it's a pretty simple mana base. I'm sure you can see it right here in the screen. He's playing 1 off Blast Zone probably to stop anything problematic, whether that is a Teferi, whether that is an Uro, or things like that. Maybe you can always just put counters on it, kill your opponent's Reclamation in case you want it to stop. But besides the main deck, let's discuss the sideboard, which is the very interesting thing. Aether Gust obviously against red or green matchups, and also it's good against Reclamation decks because you stop their Uro, you stop their Reclamation, you stop any of their Nightback ambushers, which is good. Negate is here against any deck where you would want to counter any non-creature spells. Scorching Dragonfire is here against aggro decks. Bonecrusher Giant is a very interesting pick because not only does it kill something early on, it also leaves you with a blocker. Soulseer was also super interesting. I really like this this choice, especially because it kills that 4-drop demon from mono black that is way too annoying to deal with. So that's why I think it's a very good inclusion. Another Storm's Wrath in case you need the board wipe early. And the thing that surprised me the most, Elder Gargaroth. I don't need to tell you how broken this card is. Whenever I used to stick this against any aggro deck, the game would simply be over. 2 commence the end game against any matchup where you don't want to tap out on your turn, maybe against Reclamation, maybe against Bant Ramp, and Shark Typhoon against the Fairy obviously, and other things where you would need it. Now how do I usually use the sideboard? Most of the time against aggro decks I take out 2 Reclamation, 2 Expansion Explosion. Depending on which aggro deck it is, you can take out Gust, you obviously take out Negate and Mystical Dispute, and you can side in your Storm's Wrath, your Soulseer, your Bonecrusher Giant, your Scorching Dragonfire, and obviously you would want your Elder Gargaroth, but trust me, do not be afraid to side this card in against any aggressive decks, because if it sticks for 2 turns, the game is simply yours. You can either make beasts or just stall with them using the gain life option. Trust me, this card is a sleeper, but it's going to be huge in the next upcoming weeks. So with that, we're done with the Temur list from Javier Dominguez, and let's get into our next deck. After covering the second Temur Reclamation list, we need to cover the winner, and the winner was Yoshihiko Ikawa. I really hope I pronounced your name correctly. If I didn't, I'm terribly sorry, forgive me. What I found really cool about his list is that he's playing Nightback Ambusher in the main board, and that usually surprises a lot of opponents, and that's very good in the mirror matchup because you have a flash speed threat that surprises a lot of people. Now his besides running Nightback Ambusher, the interesting things were running 2 Scorching Dragonfire in the main board as opposed to running 2 Storm's Wrath like Javier Dominguez. And I like Scorching Dragonfire even in the mirror matchups because when they play their Uro, before the sacrifice trigger goes on the stack, you can just Scorching Dragonfire it, and this says if it would die this turn, exile it instead. And then Uro says when it enters, you need to sacrifice it, so it technically dies, so it exiles it for good. So it's not that dead of a card in the mirror matchups. You can also use it to tackle the Shark Typhoons. Now besides that, he's running the usual Reclamation package, which is Spiral, Uro, Reclamation, Expansion, Explosion. He's playing Shark Typhoon obviously to deal with the Teferi and things that are problematic, or just for him to have a way to use his mana even if his opponent doesn't present something for him to counter or to deal with. Besides that, he's playing 1 Brazen Bar, which I found to be very useful while testing. For off Mystical Dispute, he's probably expecting a lot of Temur Reclamation mirrors, and a lot of the games that came in the final between him and Javier Dominguez came to who had the dispute on their opening hand or not. Now regarding the mana base, it's a pretty simple mana base, but he's running 2 off Blast Zone instead of running just 1 like the usual lists. Now sideboard wise, he also has an interesting sideboard, especially Narset's Reversal. Now Narset's Reversal is technically good against a lot of spell-based decks. Like for example, you could play this against Expansion Explosion, Narset's Reversal, their expansion, copy it, their explosion, you draw all of the cards. But I found it to be very interesting against the Thought Distortion decks, Sultai Ramp, because this doesn't really counter the spell, it just bounces it to their opponent's hand. So if they ever Thought Distortion you Narset's Reversal, you will bounce their Thought Distortion to their hand, and then you will take it along with any other thing they have in their hand. So make sure to play around Narset's Reversal when you have a Thought Distortion. Aether Gust and Negate are played for reasons that we previously mentioned. Scorching Dragonfire obviously for aggro matchups. Brazen Bar is a good card to side in against the mirror just because you have an instant way of dealing pressure to your opponent. For off Bone Crusher Giant, just to capitalize on these mono green, mono black and mono red decks. Elder Gargaroth, again, it's an insane card that you will see more of in standard, I promise you. Commands the endgame, we've covered before why you would play this to kind of have a flash threat that can be countered against Temur Reclamation or against Bant Ramp. And last but not least, Shark Typhoon to deal with anything problematic, whether that's Teferi or any annoying creatures. And with that, let's get into our third deck. Who would have expected more Reclamation decks in the top spots? Obviously everyone. But the interesting thing about this deck is that it's not Temur Reclamation, it's 4 Color Reclamation. Now you're asking me, what's your payoff from splashing a 4th color? Teferi Time Raveler, which single-handedly just annihilates the Reclamation mirror match. Why? Because people don't usually play around Teferi when they see you going turn 1 Steam Vents, or like turn 1, for example, Breeding Pool, turn 2 Forest, Growth Spiral. People usually don't consider the option of you having Teferi, and then if you can surprise them with the Teferi and get it to resolve, you're quite ahead in the mirror match. And because Teferi single-handedly stops the Reclamation decks, you probably know that because he says that you can't cast spells unless you could cast them at sorcery speed. So your Reclamation floating mana for you doesn't do anything besides help you cycle a bigger Shark Typhoon. So that's pretty good with the Teferi side. Now that's not the only reason you are splashing colors. Now I'm gonna go to the sideboard because most of the deck is a pretty standard Reclamation deck. The only interesting thing is that due to splashing Teferi, the player had to cut down, the player being Christian Calcano, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, had to cut down on some Aether Gusts, and he decided to only play a single-handed copy of Scorching Dragonfire. But besides that, let's get into our sideboard, which is where the interesting cards come. Spectre Sailor is not a usual card that you would find in Reclamation decks, but it's a very good card, especially if you get to stick him early, then resolve a Reclamation. You now have every turn, you can just pay 4 mana, draw a card, pay 4 mana, draw a card, and that runs away with the game pretty quickly if unanswered. Devout Decree is a very good answer to any black deck because it's simply 2 mana exile, their biggest threat. And your main problem with a Reclamation deck is that you can't handle their 3-drop dinosaur, I guess it's called Raging Register or something like that, because it's a 7/6, so damage based removal doesn't work, but Devout Decree does wonders. Aether Gust is obviously here against red or green decks. Negate, obviously for the reasons we've mentioned before. Fry is a very interesting card because it kills off any Teferi that you need to stop, because obviously Teferi shuts down your whole game plan. Justice Strike is such a good removal spell because once again it deals with Raging Regisaur, and this deck performed quite well against aggro decks. So if you're bothered by aggro decks, I do recommend picking up this deck, and I'm most likely going to cover it in a deck in a video tomorrow. So if you want to wait for that before redeeming any wild cards, feel free to do so. He has his last copy of Dispute in the sideboard. Obviously, he's playing 3 in the main board. Solar Blaze is a very efficient board wipe because unlike Storm's Wrath, which deals only 4 damage and does not deal once again with the Raging Regisaur, this deals with every single creature that has obviously higher power than toughness. And the last interesting card, Kenrith. Kenrith with Reclamation is simply an insane combo. Whether you just draw a card every single turn, whether you gain 5 life every single turn, this card is gonna run away with the game pretty quickly. And with that out of the way, let's get into our 4th deck. For those of you who want to play huge spells very early, like for example slam in Ugin, slam in a huge Hydrocrisis, or for those of you who just simply want to play turn 3 Nissa and watch the world collapse, this is Simic Ramp, and I highly encourage you to play that deck because it performed quite well. But this is the list that I found the most interesting. It's from Andres Orosa Fernandez. I'm pretty sure that he either got 3rd or 4th place, so his deck is very solid. So let's discuss it quite a bit. But one thing I wanted to mention, Simic Ramp is now well placed in the meta because they finally have access to a board wipe in the main board, and that board wipe is Ugin. Simic as a color lacks a lot of board wipes, it lacks removal as well, but Ugin solved that problem and is pushing the deck over the top, so I highly recommend you either play this deck or just simply watch out from it because it will be relevant in the meta. Now, this is again a very generic Simic Ramp list, so you're going to expect Spiral, you're going to expect Uro, and then you're going to expect Cultivate, and your payoffs are the Nissa Hydrocrisis combo or the Nissa I just play Ugin on turn 6 combo and win the game that way. Now, the main board is not the interesting part about this deck. The interesting part is the sideboard. Sideboard wise, he's playing a lot of cool threats, whether there are flash threats like Nightpack Ambusher or Brazen Borrower, and he's also playing Shifting Ceratops, which is super cool in this matchup, and it gives the deck a whole different angle because a lot of people are going to be siding in Negates and things to deal with your non-creature spells, and then if you can surprise them with a Nightpack Ambusher, you can surprise them with a Shifting Ceratops, you are going to win the game, trust me. So besides that, Borrower is not only to flash and then threaten your opponents on their turn, it's also here because it gets to bounce either creatures, reclamations, annoying planeswalkers. You have it, you can anything on the field can be bounced by Brazen Borrower. Mystical Dispute is just here because he wants to run 4 in the sideboard, maybe against Reclamation decks, so he has 1 in the sideboard. Wilt is good against Temur Jund Sacrifice decks, there's no Temur Sacrifice, and against Temur Reclamation. So if you don't see a lot of these decks on the ladder, you can maybe cut these down, then play more Nightpack Ambushers. Negate is here against a lot of the annoying non-creature spell decks, like for example Temur Reclamation, this deck, Simic Ramp, Sultai Ramp, any of these annoying decks. Disdainful Stroke is here against the mirror match because it's very good. It can stop Nissa, it can stop Ugin, it can stop a huge Hydrocrisis because on the stack Hydrocrisis is not a 2 mana spell, he's a X mana spell. He's an X plus 2 mana spell technically. And then last but not least, you have your Aether Gust and your Arboreal Grazer. Arboreal Grazer is here against any deck where you need early on blockers. One more thing about Stroke is that it also can counter Reclamation, so it's a pretty solid card in the current meta. And with that out of the way, let's get into our 5th and our final deck. No meta list can be complete without Bant Ramp, and that's why we're covering Bant Ramp as our last deck. Now, don't think that this deck is bad just because, it runs Sublime Epiphany, it doesn't run 4 Nissa, 4 Hydrocrisis, what's wrong with this deck? This deck performed super well, it's either 3rd or 4th in the standings, and many Devudi played it super well, so trust me, don't sleep on this deck, consider it. If you have the card, just try it out for a couple of games, it's good. Now, this deck capitalizes on Joriel as much as possible, and that's why you're playing 4 of Opt, and that's why you're playing Llanowar Visionary as kind of your 4th Uro. I mean, he's not technically an Uro, but he does draw a card when he enters and gives you additional mana the turn after. So in a hypothetical word, he's a very bad Uro. Now, funny enough, he's not playing a lot of main board wipes, but obviously you wouldn't run a lot of board wipes in a deck where you want to stick your True Drop and grow your board with it. The interesting cards are Dovin's Veto because it stops a lot of the things where usually Dispute stops Negate. Like for example, you can stop a huge expansion explosion and you don't have to worry about, opponent can dispute my 2 mana counter spell because Dovin's Veto simply can't be countered. And besides that, the deck is very generic Bant Ramp. You have your Teferis, you have your Spirals. The other interesting card is Ugin because some Bant decks are not playing Ugin anymore in the main board. And the other interesting card is Sublime Epiphany. Sublime Epiphany is a super interesting spell. Now the maximum thing I got from Sublime Epiphany was a 4-for-1, but I mean a 4-for-1 is simply just enough. I made a copy of, while testing this deck, I made a copy of Llanowar Visionary, I drew a card, I bounced something, and I countered my opponent's Nightpack Ambusher. So I'm pretty sure if you 4-for-1 your opponent with one spell, you're kind of winning the game. And funny enough, I also created a token with Joriel. So Sublime Epiphany is not a card you should be sleeping on. It's a very good card, and this shell took the maximum advantage with Sublime Epiphany. The foodie won a lot of games just by using this card, so do consider this deck if you have the wild cards. Now regarding sideboard, he's probably going to try to capitalize on aggro decks because the main board is not very equipped to handle those, and that's why you see your 3 Shatter the Skies, that's why you see your Scavenging Ooze, because it's a very good card. It can block in the early games, and in the late game it can help you just gain some life. And the other interesting thing about Scavenging Ooze is that it deals with Uro, and sometimes Reclamation decks side out their 2 Reclamations, and they side out 2 Reclamations, and they also side out 2 Expansion Explosion. So if you take out their Uros, you kind of dealt with a bunch of their threats. Besides that, Aether Gust is obviously against the red or green matchups, Devout Decree is against black or red matchups, obviously, and this is very good against the mono black decks, especially if they're playing the Regisaur on curve. 2 mana to counter their 3 mana spell is just simply pure tempo, pretty generic magic. Delphin's Veto is here against Reclamation or against the mirror match, because you would want the key spells not to resolve, like for example Nissa, Teferi, Ugin. You need to run Delphin's Veto. Mystical Dispute is obviously something that you need in this meta, but instead of playing it in the main board, Manny decided to play it in the sideboard, so you obviously would bring that in against a Bant Ramp deck, any Ramp deck mainly, and against Temur Reclamation. Baneslayer Angel is a very interesting card because it gains you life against aggressive decks, and what I find pretty funny is that mono black decks are actually running a demon, that 4-drop demon, so the protection from demons might actually be relevant just once, but once is enough flavor wise for me. Elspeth Conquers Death is obviously here against any mid-range decks, because that because that card is simply insane against any mid-range deck. And besides that, that's pretty much it for the deck. Now guys, if you did enjoy this video, please do consider subscribing because it helps the channel a lot. Before signing off, I would like to thank my Patreons for making my content possible, and a special shout out for I am Mark Mac. And with that, I'll see you guys next time.